A Democrat. Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda Laurel. Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. The Texas primaries conclude May 27th, and though most statewide primaries were decided on March 4th, Texas voters still have some critical races to decide. Democratic voters will choose the party's nominees for the U.S. Senate seat that incumbent Republican John Cornyn has held since 2003. Also on the docket, the Democratic nominee for State Agriculture Commissioner. But it's Republicans who have two very high-profile races, the heated race for Texas Lieutenant Governor and State Attorney General. State Agriculture and Railroad Commissioners are also in the runoff election. But despite these highly contentious runoffs, voter turnout is projected to be very low. So tonight we ask, what does low voter turnout mean for the candidates? Does negative campaigning help or hurt a candidate? And just who will end up on the November ballot? To help guide us through this evening's discussion, we are pleased to welcome Senator Sylvia Garcia, representing Texas District 6, Jay Iyer, Assistant Professor of Law and Policy at the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University, and Paul the Taxman Betancourt, CEO of Betancourt Tax Advisors. And leading our discussion, as always, our hosts David Jones and Gary Polland.
Oh, no.
But they forgot Senator-elect.
Yes. I guess. Or did you drop out? Did you drop out?
I thought you forgot the property tax protest deadline, David. Okay, just right around the corner.
So, Jay, you're an academic now, and so you get to tell us something about the profile of the runoff races.
Right.
May 27th. Early voting is underway.
Exactly. Early voting is underway. We have four essentially large, important contested races. We've got others, but the four main ones on the Republican side. Obviously, the marquee race is the lieutenant governor's race between the incumbent David Dewhurst and State Senator Dan Patrick, who Paul is going to succeed. And the other race is the attorney general's race, succeeding Greg Abbott. You've got State Senator Ken Paxton and State Representative Dan Branch in a very contested race. On the Democratic side, for U.S. Senate, we have a very interesting race between a Dallas area dentist, David Alamiel, who's running a largely self-funded campaign, versus Keisha Rogers, who's a perennial candidate and a LaRouche Democrat. And then we've got an interesting, contested race on the Ag Commissioner side between a little-known rancher named Ben Hogan and a Kinky Friedman, who is satirist and former gubernatorial independent candidate, who actually ran for Ag Commissioner, I think, previously 4 years ago.
So, Sylvia, before Paul predicts that Dan Patrick is going to be Lieutenant Governor, why don't we just anticipate that happens, and you tell us what it's going to be like to not only be running against Dan Patrick in the fall, but being one of his senators that he will, you'll be under his regulations.
Well, see, so because David's already presupposing the election's over, which I bet you contest, so you don't.
Well, I think that it's a lot of Democrats across the state would be happy if Dan Patrick wins. I think it'll be easier for us not only to run our lieutenant governor candidate, which is Leticia Van Pute, also a state senator, but it'll also be a good for even the gubernatorial race. I mean, I think we can sort of wrap everybody around some of the rhetoric and some of the anti-woman, anti-immigrant, and anti-bashing that Dan Patrick has done, and is not ashamed to do it. I think it's just going to get even worse, as it has been demonstrated in the debates. I mean, the debates that have been going on between lieutenant governor candidates have reached a new low. I mean, they've been mudslinging. It's kind of been fun watching them do it. And I think it's going to be easier for our side to just come in and show the real difference and the real choices to the average Texan. And Texans don't like mudslinging.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that Sylvia got at least one thing right, Paul.
Yeah,
Texans don't like mudslinging.
And because Texans don't like mudslinging, Dan Patrick is going to win in a runaway in this runoff election. And what's happened is that when you get down to discussing what happened to somebody 30 years ago, and you pull out mental health records that a lot of people think shouldn't have ever been used.
Well, they're supposed to be confidential.
Well, they're supposed to be confidential, and that's clearly an inappropriate political attack, okay? And so the only bashing, Sylvia, I would say that's really been occurring is that Dan's been getting bashed by what I consider to be unfair personal attacks, and I think the voters are responding to it. Clearly, the momentum has shifted definitely over to the Patrick campaign, and since we're right around the corner from the election, David, I can say that at least my prediction is that Dan Patrick will be the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor.
But Sylvia did make a good point. The negative campaigning, do we believe the negative campaigning that's happened in this race and in the Attorney General's race for the Republicans, is that driven down turnout for the runoff?
There's no question that the runoff turnout's down, and
Yeah.
Jay can quote the stats, but we're looking at a turnout in Harris County, probably 100,000, but it could be half of what the primary was. Look,
And the registered voters in Harris County are north of 1 million, right?
Right.
no, they're north of 2 million at this
North
point.
of 2 million, so we're talking about a 5% turnout or less?
Sure.
Right. I mean,
Pretty
and the
pathetic.
thing that we also need to factor in is that this has been a relatively low turnout primary to begin with. The runoff is going to be even lower. And so when you look at the character of the voter, it sort of changes. And so you're looking at a situation where, at least on the Republican side, I mean, Senator Patrick is, I think the one thing we all agree on is that Senator Patrick will win. The question is sort of what the margin is.
And he's driving the vote.
And he's driving the vote. And so that's going to have an effect on two other Republican races that we should think about. The Attorney General's race, and then also, it's also going to have an effect on a congressional race that I think Paul can talk about for the seat that...
Congressional 36,
Right.
Steve Stockman's
Correct.
Stockman's
Steve Stockman's all race where I think Ben Struzan really is going to do well in as a consequence of that. So the issue you're going to have is that where Dan Branch, who is traditionally been thought of as sort of a moderate to conservative from the Dallas area, even though he's sort of catching up to Ken Paxton.
He's still getting outpolled.
Correct.
Because the conservative voices in the Republican Party are the ones that are turning out to vote. And in fact, I recently looked at the numbers, and the average Republican primary voter has been through 4 or 5 primaries. That's the person that's voting in this election, and that's why they're going to be voting more conservative. So we can predict Patrick and Paxton as
So what
the
you're going
winners.
to see is arguably the most conservative Republican
was gonna be-
statewide ticket you have ever had in history.
And my question related to that is
And that
this,
plays, frankly, into what the senator was saying earlier.
which is, if your primary turnout is getting down under 5%, and that's who you're talking to, your general election turnout's going to be over 50. There's a whole slew of voters that voted in neither primary. They're going to come into the fall and decide to vote.
And Gary,
Who are they going to be attracted to, and what kind of
you're
campaign
absolutely
attracts
right.
them?
And what's going to happen is a lot of people are just going to get put out, and the ones that are going to be turned off, if you will be the voter that I think that the Republican Party is going to need, because our base is getting more mobilized the more they see this. I mean, the ground game has been going on now for months, and we're still, what, 6 months till election? I mean, we haven't really even gotten full swing.
But Sylvia, it's not showing up in the turnout of the Democratic Party because
Well,
we're
we don't have real races in our runoff.
Right.
I agree, but there's nothing to motivate people
Keisha
there.
Roberts is running on a
It's
platform.
Rogers.
Sorry,
She has
Rogers.
not changed her name. It's still Keisha Rogers.
Well, and she has not changed her tactics either, because she is saying to impeach President Obama. So
Well,
you
she's
have
a
a Democrat.
She's a LaRouche.
Well, I know.
There
but
is
look,
nobody in the
but-
Democratic Party that I know that's supporting her.
Well,
Do you think there's a
nobody
chance?
turning out to vote against her? Wait a minute.
Is she going to get the nomination?
Oh, absolutely not.
No, let's
Sylvia,
absolutely not.
you need to amplify on one thing, though, and that is
Okay.
because Paul actually let this go, and I think you need to be a
Paul
little
let
bit more.
something go?
You need to be a little bit. You need to be a little bit more honest about what you think will be the messages that will be directed Dan Patrick's way. Especially when we talk about people who are living in the valley who have heard somebody talk about their kinfolk being criminals and disease-ridden as they're coming across the Rio Grande. You need to talk
Oh, you
about
mean the
that
Great
woman
Invasion?
in the Rio Grande Valley who has to drive 150 miles, thanks to Dan Patrick, in order to have a termination of pregnancy.
Well,
And how does that work?
I can tell you, just talking from friends and family members, I mean, when Greg Abbott called, the Rio Grande Valley a third world country, they were offended. When they hear Dan Patrick talk about this disease-ridden people coming across the border, or this invasion from Mexico. The only invasion I see is the good avocados that are coming from Mexico that we can't find here. I mean, it's
Can you launch on
you
that,
can't.
Sylvia?
Yes, you
Yeah,
can.
that's right.
Limes as well.
And limes as well. I mean, it's just ludicrous. You can't expect people to support you if you're talking about them and disrespecting them that way.
Okay, but
and
Sylvia-
people are going to remember, and they're going to remember in November.
Your
when
former colleague-
Wendy Davis had her opening of headquarters in McAllen, It was busting at the seams. Both Wendy Davis and Senator Vanderpeet were going to be in the Valley this weekend.
But
I mean,
Sylvia,
we're gonna
Wendy
work
did not
hard.
carry 24 Texas counties, and the vast majority of them are in the Valley.
Well, hello,
So,
why
I
do you
mean,
think she's down there?
Well, I know, but
you know,
but you talk about this, and your former colleague runs against a little-known Democrat, and that person whips her in the Valley and carries
who's my
counties.
former colleague?
What's that? Yeah, I mean, no, it's Wendy Davis.
She's
okay?
still my colleague. She's
Well,
still
I know,
a
but
state
she's
senator.
She's
as is
coming out
Leticia.
of being state senate. She won't be there next session.
Well, she's
okay?
still not a former colleague.
JR, what were the, forget this turn, forget the turnout models, Jay.
My
What are
point
the,
is we have to be respectful. She's still a state senator, so is Leticia Vanderpeet, so is Senator Patrick. I mean,
Oh.
they are still all my colleagues.
well, and we respect his medical records, and they should be private. Although it came out in a
Well said.
deposition, it was
Right,
not a leak
right.
from a physician's office. It
Well,
was a
the details.
deposition.
Okay, yeah. But I wanna
So,
start-
what were the issues that came out that these folks were running on in the Republican primary?
Oh, well, I mean, I think I will say this. Senator Patrick, I think, has been very clear, right? Border security, right? And he wants to have a tax change. He wants a tax code change.
Right, property tax
Property
cut.
tax cut. Essentially, he's run on two issues. And he's been very consistent about that. So I think, in that sense, to dovetail into what Senator Garcia just said, the argument that the question of how you deal with immigrants coming across the border is a salient one, right? Because if your primary issue is that the border is not secure, then I think that sort of lends itself to it. And then all those other issues that come from that will follow. But
Well,
those have been two issues. So to his defense, Senator Patrick has been very clear. That's the two things he wants to talk about.
Except if you heard when he did our show a couple weeks ago, he talked about the border, but you heard, which I believe is a message that I hadn't heard before, about compassion for those entering the country illegally and the way they get treated. And so
Right.
what I anticipate happening is most people aren't paying attention to the Republican primary because they don't care, or the Democratic primary. They're going to start paying attention maybe in August, maybe not till
you
September.
mean he's going to soften up?
No. What I think is going to happen. What I think is going to happen is Dan is going to start talking about public policy reform in the state, and you're going to have a message that I think is going to be designed to reach independents who are
He's gonna
concerned
start
about
talking-
transportation, water,
He's gonna start talking about
education
conserv-
reform, Medicaid reform, and the like. I think that's what's coming.
He's going to start talking about conservative solutions to Texas challenges. Now let's look over the map.
You meant like charter schools?
Right, sure.
Robbing public schools to pay for
No,
private?
David, that's not how
Is
it
it-
works.
that-
Now, all right, let's go back to the point at hand. All right. Now, right now in Texas, there's no question that this level of negative campaigning, which is unprecedented, I would say we've been in politics
and
for
no
25
discussion
years.
about real
Well, let me
issues.
say this. Let me say this. I know we all think it's
There's been
unprecedented.
no discussion about
But
real
it happens
issues.
almost every cycle, right? Probably the best comparison to this lieutenant governor's race is the 1990 Democratic nomination for governor between
Maddox and
Richards, and White.
That was bad.
Was an awful
Right.
display.
I said this has
It's
been-
very, very similar,
Right.
actually.
This has been about 25 years.
Okay, we all agree with
right.
that one.
Yeah. Right. Now,
Yeah.
so that does depress turnout, and the question is what happens in the fall. Now, when you look at the numbers from the last election, President Obama got 41% of the vote in Texas, and I think former representative, your former colleague in the legislature, Mr. Sadler, got 40. So in that election, your best star player on the Democratic side got 41, and somebody that had hardly been heard of got 40. So I don't see that Texas is in danger of going, blue in this election cycle, even with a bitter Republican primary.
Except Paul, if Republicans decide to run a campaign in the fall, kind of like Clayton Williams was against Ann Richards, negative, demeaning. I mean, truly. I mean, I don't buy this. We have a war on women, but you certainly can campaign in a way that'll demean women, like Clayton did, and things of that nature. Then we could be in trouble. We repeat the campaign lessons of the spring in the fall. We're going to drive voters away from the polls. Then it's all a base election, and if the Democrats do a better job of turning out their base than us, then we got a problem. If we run a just negative campaign without
Look,
public
Gary,
policy.
there's no debating the fact that you have an inherent Republican advantage of somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 10 points for anyone, right? And that's been proven out in the last 4 to 5 election cycles. That's essentially what the polls say right now. And no one knows Wendy Davis, no one knows Greg Abbott at all, realistically, because people aren't really paying it as close attention. So now's when it starts. Okay, so after this, now's when it starts. So the challenge for the Davis campaign is to define the issue as the last decade plus of Republican rule in Texas has been, and whether it's been good or bad, depending on her perspective, I would say bad. And the challenge for Abbott is to define himself against what has been happening, right? Because he's going to have to show something different than what has happened, and that's going to be the challenge for him.
Listen,
And he's not going to be able to show that if he's afraid of debate. I mean, clearly, Wendy Davis is prepared to debate and has outlined 6 cities, including our Houston, to debate. He's saying no only to 2. I don't know what he's afraid of, and frankly, I'll say it again. I've said it publicly already. I'm sort of offended that he's not coming to Houston. I mean, this is where he started. This is where he started his political career.
I have no idea where he's going.
He'll be invited to come on our
I
show.
think you should come to Houston. You should do one here.
He's going to debate here?
Now,
One of your colleagues,
happy to have
Sylvia,
him.
one of your colleagues wrote an article in the Chronicle recently, and the message was to Republicans, which was to a Hispanic state rep. He said, you need to understand, Mr. and Mrs. Republican, that Hispanics in Texas are poorer, they're less healthy, and they're less educated than everyone else. And we need to improve in each of those metrics. And so the message to them was, talk more about those issues. And I'm asking you, is Wendy Davis going to talk about?
Well, she's already been doing that. She's laid out her plan for education. It's called the Texas Promise. She's laid it out for what we need to do in high school, what we need to do for pre-K. She's been going across the state talking about that. She's been talking about infrastructure. She's been talking about things that daily Texans
Does
really
she want to take the Medicaid
about.
money?
Of course she wants to take the Medicaid
Did
money.
she talk about how we're going to pay for everything?
Yes.
The federal government's going to pay for all that.
That's like Santa Claus. I forgot. I'm sorry.
There is no Santa Claus, guys. And there ain't no free lunch either.
All right, let me say this. Wendy Davis is a relatively new phenomenon in the state of Texas, okay? Somewhat created by the last filibuster in the last legislative session prior to the one that we just, prior to the one that we're going to in 15. Now, however, Greg Abbott has been around for almost 30 years as in elected office. He is a fabulous campaigner. He is a guy that makes self-deprecating jokes about his wheelchair. He is going to be in every corner of the state. He already has been, and he
So
is
why
a
is he afraid
juggernaut.
to debate?
Well, not that I know of. The only thing I saw that he didn't want to do 6, so we're going to do a number less than 6. And we did touch on something because of the built-in advantage here in Texas for Republicans. Where you see the debate or where the numbers could switch are in urban areas like Harris County. That could be the battleground.
Well,
it's very unlikely that there'll be a breakthrough by a state Democratic.
Let me say this: the difference is when you look at traditionally how red state Democrats have been successful, it's when they run essentially as almost right of center Democrats.
Sure.
Brad Henry in Oklahoma is a great example.
Democrats.
Right. Bashir and
Bill
in Kentucky.
Bill White tried that.
No, he really didn't though. And so
He ran as a liberal. I forgot.
Well, he certainly didn't run. I don't think anyone
No,
would
it's
mistake
Rick
him
Perry
for.
that's a liberal now,
I
according
don't
to
think
some
anyone would
Tea
mistake
Party
him
people.
for Brad Henry.
No.
The point being is that the area, the ground is suburban and exurban counties. For Wendy Davis to be successful in a statewide election, she has to win counties like Fort Bend. She has to be competitive in counties like Montgomery. She has to win Harris County by an advantage that has historically, she has to essentially duplicate what Adrian Garcia did.
There is no fact, I know you're at a think tank now, but there is no fact or supposition of fact that a county like Montgomery, which went 81 for Romney and 19 for Obama, is going to be competitive in this election.
No, that's not what I'm
Okay.
saying, competitive.
All right.
She has to do better. She has to increase the advantage for Democrats 20 to 30. She has to lose 60-40, 75-25.
Well, that's not going to happen.
Right, and that's the
That's it.
challenge.
Well, but the
that's
question,
the challenge for her.
but what y'all are saying is it's the turnout model. The
It's a
off-year
turnout,
election,
right.
typically, the Democrats nationwide have more trouble turning out their presidential election voters. They don't come to the polls. Now, if they're more successful this time, and for some reason our party, Republican Party, turns people off and they don't want to come to the polls, then all of a sudden you have competitive elections.
Right,
That is true.
Republican women are what this entire election is about.
Oh, I think that's
because
right.
because Wendy Davis and Leticia Van Depute can touch Republican women in a way to say, look, Paul's
And
my
I
friend,
think
but
that they're going
Paul,
to
but-
be there. They're going to be there. I think the
That's the
independent
entire-
woman voter
but
is
let-
going to make it. Let me finish, Paul. I think the independent woman voter, young people, and older Texans who are scared, because they are scared that if you're not going to accept Medicaid, then you're not going to accept Medicare, and whatever we get from Medicare in Texas, you're going to then not do the nursing homes. They are scared.
There was a 16-point advantage
I think
for
that's going to
Romney in the
make
last
a
election.
real difference.
All
And
right.
again, it's a ground game. It's the grassroots. They've already knocked over 1 million doors. They've made
Well, that's
thousands
the
and thousands
battleground
of
the way,
Texas people.
I can
battleground
predict,
Texas.
I can predict we'll be talking about mental health a lot more in the next legislative session. That
Well,
one,
I hope
agree.
so, because
That's
Dan Patrick
important, too.
voted against a budget that included
We
$300
voted
million
against
more
the whole
dollars for
budget.
mental
He
health
voted against the
care.
whole budget.
What are you going to do
So-
about the? What are you going to do about this, Paul Betancourt? I mean, the issues that were raised. You know, property tax reduction. You guys have been talking about that for 20 years. It's never happened.
Well,
rates
border,
are going
we've
up.
got a
Border-
really good chance to have it happen.
Border security
David.
is really a federal matter. You know,
And
there's
it's
a group
never
of
been more secure at the border
there's a
than it is
Republican
today.
group in Washington called Reform Conservatives who want to have a post-Obama conservative agenda rather than just beating Obama by talking about electrified fences and how everybody needs to start their own business when nobody owns their own business. I mean, when are you guys going to get serious about things that are in reality?
Okay, in reality, David, Texas is the job creation engine of the United States. Texas is the place where everybody wants to come. Texas is a place where, regardless of whether you're brown, black, white, or whatever, you've got a chance to go up the economic ladder because of the opportunities here, because of the business that we've allowed to grow and nurture in the state, as opposed to run it off like the Northeast or on the West Coast.
47% of the class of 2015, Paul, will not graduate.
All right.
What are they going to do?
Okay, but-
what are they going to do for a living?
We're going to
but-
have to save that thought because God has told me we need to talk about predictions on the races.
Oh, that's good. I was trying to get
So
back
I'm
to
going to
that.
have
I
to
was
cut
going
off.
to say.
Sorry, David. We'll talk to you during the
Hogan
break.
thinks that he doesn't have to
All right,
campaign
so I wanna hear
because
about
he's
this.
leaving
Kinky-
it up to God. So
Yes.
that was the
Well,
right thing to
it's
say.
a voice in my head. I don't
Right.
know. Kinky Friedman, is he the nominee for Ag Commissioner for the
I think so.
Democrats? Is he a formidable candidate in November? Got name ID.
I think the name ID will be good, and a lot of it will depend on whether he really will get out there and campaign and really
So that's-
talk
that
about,
could be a
about
doable
some of the
race.
issues
I think
with
actually he
with
might
that
lose
office.
because we did some polling recently and he's upside down on polling in Democrat Party.
Interesting. Okay, so now
Yeah.
we got to talk about predictions. Okay, so we did House District 36, Ben Strusan, Brian Babin. Paul,
But it's a classic dichotomy between two types of Republicans. You've got a Republican that's been in government, that's voted to raise taxes, that should be proud of his what he spent his tax money on, and then you've got a true deficit hawk.
Okay, so the prediction is what?
Prediction is what? Strusan and a squeaker.
Strusan wins.
Yeah,
Strusan.
Struzan, really because of Dan. You can thank Dan Patrick.
Interesting.
I don't know
Okay.
that
And
race
we all
well
agree
enough.
Patrick's going to beat Dewhurst. Dewhurst ran not one positive ad, as far as
No,
I could tell.
and when you don't run a
Unfortunately.
positive ad, you've got nothing to go to
Yeah,
the voters
okay.
for.
Attorney
In fact, there's
General,
no turnout mechanism
thing.
for
Where's the issue of gay marriage in the fall? Where's it go?
We didn't finish the predictions.
Let's go to the
There-
predictions.
we
All
have-
right,
we
okay.
have-
We haven't. There's other races.
There's a
There are not
constitutional
any
amendment.
races that anybody knows anything about.
David, you missed it. The constitutional amendment passed in 2005 and defined marriage as one man and one woman. Now back to the predictions.
Whether or not that it's
Paxton-
legally going to be on the boards.
Okay,
very soon,
Paxton
we'll know.
wins by about 4 or 5 points.
Yeah, Paxton's going to win. I think more
You know,
than 4 and 5.
I wouldn't be surprised if Branch pulls it off, just because he's gotten a lot more money, he's gotten support,
Yeah.
and when you've got even Paxton's local law enforcement group
they
withdrawing their endorsement, and then you've got area law enforcement groups. I mean, people are withdrawing their endorsement.
Yeah.
And there's still a question about, yes, we know he paid a fine to the securities group because of, he admitted what he
$1,000
did.
It's $1,000.
But there's still a question whether there'll be criminal charges later. I mean,
We
I
have the
don't
local.
know.
We have the
Again,
local race.
Dan
There is only
Patrick.
one local race.
There's
That
lots
is
of local
Which
Kim
race?
Ogg as the DA candidate
No,
versus.
that's fall.
Well, back, David, back.
The races are over with
Agriculture
for the
Commissioner.
runoff.
Sorry, Agriculture Commissioner. Tommy Merritt, Wayne Christian.
No, it's not Wayne Christian. It's Sid Miller.
Sid Miller.
Sid
At
Miller.
least,
Wayne Christian
at least
lost.
identify the right race.
Sid
Yeah,
Miller.
thank you.
Right, Sid Miller for sure.
All right,
on the
same-
Republican
same-
side.
Same
here.
reason, Dan Patrick.
Okay. The Railroad Commission.
That's a little more
Ryan
interesting.
State, Wayne Christian.
Yeah, it's sitting,
That's right.
and that right now I would say is actually too close to call. I'm not sure how it's going to go.
Who benefits from the Patrick factor?
That's a great question. I mean, Christian's a local guy, and so that you would think there's some pull there. If I would say that's mainly because I know Christian better than the other candidate,
right.
but I think Wayne gets a little bit of an advantage because of Dan.
is running a campaign of that I'm an engineer and actually understand what's supposed to happen.
We have
And
a- we have-
Christian has a lot more pro-life
We
background.
only have a
one that
minute to
has
go.
some-
We have a
Let's just
fascinating,
do the
local judicial race. Alicia Franklin versus Denise
Franklin
Pratt.
in a wipeout because
Yes,
Pratt,
yes.
anybody out there, if
Pratt's
you're
not
voting for Pratt,
campaigning,
you're
though,
making a
is
Her
mistake.
signs were at the polls.
Yeah,
Oh, they
that's
were?
a strange,
Yes.
strange.
I thought she was not campaigning anymore.
You better hope that she wins.
Somebody
We better
put her
hope that
signs
Pratt
up.
Yeah, we like. I think. Yeah, I think
right.
Democrats would
Well,
like her to win.
Alicia Franklin for sure.
Okay.
No other vote. It's a must vote for Republicans.
Any other local races you want to comment on the runoff before Linda takes
Before
over?
Linda takes back over.
Why are you killing
Larissa
us
Cordova,
with this?
JP, big district, race
Okay.
4, she wins
She
and run away.
wins?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's it?
okay, well, that's good.
Very good.
That's good.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming. We'll have you back. This is a great group. We'll have you back in the fall. We'll be talking about maybe predictions for the primaries in the fall. We'll see what happens. And by the way,
Don't
please
forget
talk
the debates.
Talk to Wendy Davis and tell her she needs to come do our show. Thank you. And Linda, I know you want Wendy. We do too.
I can get Greg Abbott. I can get Greg Abbott.
If only you guys had opinions, you know? I mean, I can't even imagine what the show would be if you only had an opinion.
We were debating Houston.
Absolutely.
I don't wanna be
All right, great
disrespected.
discussion. Remember, you can catch Red, White, and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. right here on TV8 and again Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. We also invite you to visit us online and send us your comments. We want to hear what you are saying about the issues that affect Houston. You can submit your comments at houstonpublicmedia.org or on Facebook. And while you're there, don't forget to like us. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Good night.
Join us